Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining this week's panel conversation. I'm really excited to have you join us today and for taking time to watch this video. We have two leaders in local government that are with us today, and they're going to be sharing their perspectives on how they engage with their community and how they're gearing up for the use of the federal American Rescue Plan funds. The intent of these conversations is really just to gather perspectives on what's working for communities, ways that they found to connect with their residents and their businesses and their stakeholders, and then to share them with others who are either in local government or are interested in how local government works. Our hope is that you're going to pick up a perspective, a new idea, something that might help you in the work that you do and in appreciating the value that local government brings to you in the community. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the vice president for a company called Polco. We work with communities around the country with just helping build stronger engagement and helping with tracking performance. And happy to be doing these weekly panel conversations with leaders in the profession. Excuse me. This is the way the day will go. I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists, and then we will get into a series of 3 questions that each of our panelists will respond to. When that is done, we'll see if there's any additional thoughts that each of them have, or if there's any kind of conversation to take place at that point. And then we will wrap it up. Typically, it takes about an hour. It'll probably be a little bit shorter today because we have 2 panelists instead of 3 panelists. But with that said, our panelists are great, and I'm really excited about introducing them to you now. Our first panelist is Ben Williamson, who is the Assistant City Manager in Farmers Branch, Texas. He's been working to find and develop potential in the city and the people and the processes. He oversees the fire department, community services, sustainability and public health, and the Mansky Library. He previously worked in the city of Southlake as their emergency management coordinator and the assistant to the director, but he's also got experience in the city of Garland in the emergency management area. And Ben, one of the things I really appreciated seeing is you've been active with ICMA. And I think you're still serving on the performance management committee, so it ties directly in line with this conversation. Thank you for being part of the conversation today, and would love it if you would just add a little bit more color to your background.
Well, the great thing about city management is every day is a new thing you're working on. But in my background, what I do is when we're trying to figure out how a process or a program should work, that's where I tend to get involved, create new programs, create new processes, refine them, and then get them in alignment with the right cities, departments, and organizations. And we like to approach here, if there's a problem, how do we turn it into a solution and an opportunity? So like if you lose somebody that retires or they get recruited away, how do we change our workflow, change our structure? And it's that kind of continuous process improvement. The easiest way to look at how I approach my city on a daily basis with my team is we use one word, we use excellence. And it's instead of having this huge rule book of all these things you do or turn an email within 30 minutes and all this other stuff, I say, you tell me what excellence is, and it either is or it isn't. And that's it. That's our daily conversation. So much that word, they're like excellence. They just say it and walk off because they know it's coming. And so that's usually how it's going every day. And it's about a little bit to it. Matt, you're still muted.
Thank you. I had to cough, so I didn't want to bother you. I've been around local government for over 3 decades, and I have to say, with all my experience with ICMA, I've always had such a positive impression of Farmers Branch and just the management structure and the work that you do. So congratulations on the work that you're doing, and thanks for taking a little bit of time for being part of this conversation.
Of course. Thank you for including me.
Let me introduce our second panelist. Chris Whittaker has been the city manager in Angleton, Texas, since March of 2020. So he came in just to enjoy the challenging times that we've all been going through. While he's been in this position, though, he has been really working hard and doing a lot of work. It sounds like Angleton is a community full of history and pride, and there's a lot of growth opportunities and growth that's actually occurring. And he's not afraid to address these issues directly head on and is working hard to move his team forward. He's got a military background, serving in the Army for 24 years and reaching the rank of lieutenant colonel. And so, Chris, thanks for that work and that experience that you bring to the table and you bring to the community. He's been working on a lot of projects. The ones that he identified in his bio included working on the community broadband access, sidewalk repairs, construction, increased economic development, doing a lot of internal fleet improvements, and just a lot of stuff, Chris. So thanks for being here. I hope your work is going well in Angleton, and really excited to hear your perspectives on what you're doing to move forward the community with engagement. You mind sharing a little bit more about what your background is?
Yeah, Ben, or Matt and Ben, great to be part of this panel. You know, y'all are the veterans. I'm trying to figure out and be like y'all. And I love these panels because it gives the opportunity to learn from others. And you know, I'm trying to be innovative. And so, you know, how do we think about that globally? And we're not just going to make it up. We're going to figure out who's doing what well. But you know, for us, it's about being able to grow. So we're growing from 18,000 to probably 24,000 in the next 3 to 5 years. I kind of fell in the middle of that and just trying to get that organized and, you know, processes put in place to make sure we have a fluid process. But part of it's being resilient, and we'll talk about ARP and how to be resilient. But we just had a Cat 1 hurricane, Nicholas, you know, direct hit last week. And so we're still recovering from that with tree branches, but we've got our power back. So, you know, like Ben said, every day is different. It's a dynamic environment and just really fun to be in, especially when you have great community partners and great people to work with.
Yeah, that's great. It is interesting, you know, you get into this new career field, and while you've got such a strong background, it is interesting and how tested you've been over the last couple of years. Just with all of the things that have been confronting communities across the globe. So I hope you've weathered well on that process, and certainly wish you well with everything you're doing. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Well, let's kick into it. The topic of the conversation is the value of community engagement under the American Rescue Plan. You know, just given what has happened over the last 16 plus months, in so many aspects. I mean, in Chris's case, environmental issues, in addition to the pandemic, you've got all of the civil unrest that's going on around the country. You've got all of the political divisiveness that's going on, and all of the unsettled ways that have impacted the communities and all the people that live in the communities. You know, the whole topic of engagement and the importance of how do you connect your residents to the work the local government does just becomes all that much more important. And, you know, honestly, engagement has never been easy, even in the best of worlds. You know, our research will say that there's only about 20% of the adult population that's actually ever been to a city council meeting. And so, I mean, there's just logical and natural barriers that have traditionally gotten in the way of people's ability to reasonably connect. And so then when you start adding on all of the other aspects that are getting in the way of or causing disruptions in people's lives, it's really important to just have a conversation about what is working, what can communities do to make sure that people feel like their voices are being heard, that there's a sense of community that's being built, that their investments that they're making are having a reasonable return in whatever aspect they define that. And so that's why we do these conversations. There's all sorts of aspects of community life, and everything that a local government does impacts some aspect of your community. And so the challenge is, how do you pull that together, and what techniques are you using to accomplish that? And so there's really 3 questions that I would love to explore with you this morning. And that is, how are you currently going through the process of figuring out how to use the federal American Rescue Plan funds? One of the initial aspects is, how do you identify the needs that your community has? Priorities that existed back in 2018 may very well not be the priorities that exist today. And so how are you going about trying to identify how to responsibly spend those monies? Then secondly, how does resident input play into the work that you do in a community in any event? You know, is it a high priority? What are the things that residents can do to make sure that their voices are being heard in your community? And then third, we want to just explore, okay, so what tools and strategies are you finding successful? What would you like to share with other local government leaders on, try this is really working well for us? Love to learn a little bit more about how you're tracking your performance so that you can kind of cut through all the community noise that communities are struggling with. and be able to demonstrate that your strategic goals that you're laying out for the community, especially over the next several years, are having a meaningful impact on the community. So with that, let's go ahead and kick into the questions. And Ben, if you don't mind, I'd love to start with you. Ben, can you talk about how Farmers Branch is going about identifying community needs as you gear up for thinking about how to use the ARPA funds?
This is a great question, because one things that I got to give credit to my strategic partners in the city was, we didn't say, okay, now we have this money, what are we going to do with it? Our strategic planning process is always on about an 18-month cycle, to where we identify council strategic priorities. We formulate that into, okay, critical business outcomes on a balanced scorecard methodology. Then we go to a director's meeting and say, okay, the council wants us to accomplish this. How do you get there? That happens early in the year, around January, February. And then we go into the budget building cycle. So what we do is we connect the council objectives to the budget cycle, but all that's being driven by strategic plans that have lived in the past, master plans, the parks plans, all the different plans that exist, the trail master plan. So when we saw ARPA funding, we didn't go, oh my gosh, we have a windfall of opportunity to do things. We looked at like, what's been identified already in our strategic plan that councils had interest in, but we're all conservative going into COVID, right? What's going to happen to hotel motel? What's going to happen to sales tax? What's going to happen to, all these different conversations are going on. What's the legislature going to do? What are the new variables we're going to have? So we approached it we went very conservative in our budgeting. We froze wages. We were wonderful. We didn't have to let anyone go or lose any positions. We just froze everything. And when we finally got word that the state was going to accept these funds and they were going to pass through, because there's different rules for different population sizes. So for us, when we found out, hey, the state's saying, yes, you're going to receive this funding. And then it's like, okay, what has strategically been identified already by council, by public input? And is it still material today? So I'm starting completely over, said, hey, one of the examples would be a signature park. And by I mean signature park, my parks director has a vision for something that lights up at night. It's 40 something feet tall, and it's unlike anything we've seen in the Metroplex area, but we couldn't get it into previous budgets. It was too much too soon, but this created a pathway. Council wanted to do it, but it was just, hey, let's kind of slow down on some of these idea projects and move forward with it. And then other items in there would be rehabs of some of our older buildings, our justice center, which is police and municipal court, and then the recreation center, rephasing that one. And we have some shared services with other cities, such as dispatch. They needed computer-aided dispatch upgrade, which that's $500,000 just for our percentage share with 3 other cities. So that's a lot of money going in there. And then helping our social service provider, they need to move locations. So they've asked the cities to help support their move, because they serve 4 different cities around here, and then do a hybrid new residential repair program, which is something we've always wanted to do, but it just never made the cut. And so what we did as far as the feedback is we went back and said, what's on the list? Are these still relevant? Because the residents, they all went through feedback channels already. So the master park or the signature park already went through the parks board, already went through the sensing meetings. So they had some light meetings to reaffirm and say, hey, are these programs and things you still want to see in the city? And we can accelerate those. So we were able to have those conversations and deliver a lot of good news. And then because we were moving some of these big projects to ARP funding, it allowed us to make some other financial maneuvers, such as pay as you go for streets. So our street bonds will be expiring. We're not going to be issuing new bonds. We're moving to pay as you go. So we've been really able to lay a solid foundation for the budget with this funding. So it's not just, hey, what new things can we do? What have we said we wanted to do? Let's get there. Can we make the budget even healthier moving forward? Because pay as you go is tough to get to for streets. So we're really excited to get into that alignment for streets. Our other funds are all very healthy. And so we were very conservative going into COVID because we didn't know what was going to happen. And it's that being conservative with our budgeting served us really well to this point. When you see the money, you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, but we weren't counting on it. And so that's a nice position to be in, to say, okay, how do we move the city forward for the next 30 years with this one-time injection of funds into the city? What does it look like for our current residents, our future residents? So you have all those different communication channels that already built all these strategic elements and plans. And we just reinforced, are these the directions we want to go, instead of, because it kind of changes the discussion. We say, hey, all of a sudden we have new money, but no, we have plans already, existing plans. And that's kind of how we looked at the community needs and priorities, because we're always doing that. Every city's always pulsing. What do you need? What does our community want? And we can never do it all. So it's managing those expectations. But now it's like, oh, if we could do more, but also what's the stuff we need to do? And streets are always a big part of that conversation, and infrastructure.
Yeah, the infrastructure thing. Well, congratulations. I mean, the challenge that a lot of communities have always run into is that the people, communities that wanted to do a pay-as-you-go on infrastructure in your streets is getting there, right? Because you've got all of this outstanding debt. So I love hearing about how you're really doing a transformational process or taking advantage of the funds for transformational impact on your community, so that going forward, you're going to be able to do things in a different way that's going to benefit future generations in the community. So I think it's really cool that you're doing it that way.
I want to give one qualifier on that though. So it's always the economics of our community. We're about 74% commercial, 26 residential, but our housing stock is not mansions everywhere. They're average price homes for a first ring suburb of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So we're not like some cities that have homes that average $5 million. Like, how do you have no debt? No. We still have some debt, but so I just want to make sure I put the constraints in there, because I once talked to a city and they're like, we're zero debt. And I'm like, how do you do that? I'm like, oh, your average home is $5 million. So to put some context to it, to our path, it's doable. We don't have any of these crazy outliers, but it's a long journey. And this was a 20-year journey that's finally starting to complete to get to that spot.
Yeah, that's very cool. Congratulations on that. Yeah. Chris, can you talk about what you're doing for identifying community needs as you consider how to spend the federal ARPA funds?
Yeah, so we did a strategic planning session with the council offsite last year. So, put a bunch of butcher paper on the wall, write down goals and objectives, rank and score them, just like Ben's talking about. And so, you get the vision from the council of what's important to them. And clearly infrastructure was important, mobility, connecting folks with sidewalks and parks is all important. So as we worked through that, that was during a major crisis we had. We had amoeba in the water, so they shut down all the water, boil water notice, huge infrastructure crisis last year regionally. And so that really just helped validate the infrastructure piece to me, because they all said, we need to be resilient. We need to have good quality water for our residents and those kind of things. So when we got the CARES funding last year, 1.1 million, we did a lot of infrastructure internal for, I call it Be Like Buc-ee's, and Ben knows Buc-ee's. It's this great chain of, the bathrooms are phenomenal. You go in and have a great experience and walk out with $100 worth of merchandise. But we said, be like Buc-ee's, because everything's touchless. So it met with the CARES funding of, trying to prevent COVID. It improved our infrastructure internally. But we looked at quality things that could affect the general public. So ARP rolls around, we get our, money's in the bank. We've got I think an October deadline to report to Treasury Department what we're doing with that money, and they've given us, I think, 8 categories or so that tell us what we can spend it on. So it's water and wastewater, it's broadband, and so those are all things that are in our wheelhouse of things we want to do approved by the council. So we took 2.4 million that we're getting this year. We're dividing that up into sewer line replacement, water line replacement. We've got a ground storage tank that we've got to fund through an emergency measure. So we're going to partially fund it through that. And we're going to take that to council in October and let them, here's the staff priority based on what you've told us the priority. Now tweak it for us and tell us that we're missing something. We'll add that or we'll change something out. And then we're going to submit that to Treasury to say, here's how we're spending the money within the category. And so again, those 8 categories or so, we've lined it up and numbered it so that we know number 4 is water and wastewater. Well, this project's going to impact that category. So we can show that we're spending that money for the right cause, the right place. And oh, by the way, hopefully within the council purview.
Hey, just kind of curious, Chris, when you went through the strategic planning process of kind of aligning the community priorities, given the underlying reality that engagement is always hard, then you've got the pandemic on top of that, and now you've got all of these coastal issues that you're struggling with, and environmental issues. Were there a lot of people that were involved or able to be involved in that conversation?
Yeah, so we involve the community, the chamber, the hospital, the school, in all these conversations. And we try to be, very transparent. Here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. And try to be very beneficial to the community. But for example, at our rec center, it's now a cooling station from last week's hurricane, and it was a warming station during the winter freeze. But we put a generator switch out there so we can hook up a generator, because at a rec center, you've got showers, you've got drinking water, you've got a place we can put cots, and we do a charging station. So again, as we spend our funding, we're trying to think about things, not only improve our infrastructure, but how do we be resilient as a community during unpredictable and challenging times.
That is really great. Also, like Ben, just the whole notion of paying attention to things that are going to move your community forward in more of a transitional way, or in a way that's going to make it more resilient. Yeah, that's very cool. Thank you. Chris, let me stay with you. Chris, can you talk about how community input influences the decisions that you and the council make in meeting their needs and expectations?
Yeah, so again, we've been trying to be very communicative and transparent. And so we got this program called Swag It, which helps us broadcast our council meetings. We also did Zoom during our council meetings when we could allow council members to dial in remotely because of the COVID restrictions. But we also put our meetings on Facebook Live. And so, some of our council members will sit up at the dais there with their cell phone up or their computer watching Facebook. Questions come in real time. So we're talking about infrastructure, and someone says, yeah, we need to fix the water, or, we're talking about roads, and yeah, how come we're not fixing my street, or, and so we get some real time feedback from residents. So when you talk about, how do you reach folks? You really have to work to be creative. During the winter storm, we signed up with this system called Code Red, and that allows us to broadcast to everyone in the community. And that's very helpful, and it's gotten good feedback from the residents. But we're doing a town hall next week. So again, in person, talk about development. So you just got to keep pressing all the ways. I'm in Rotary, so again, I go get feedback from Rotary. I'm working with the chamber. I get feedback from the chamber, and so you just got to keep asking yourself, how do we get ourselves out there and make ourselves available to the public?
Yeah, it really sounds like Angleton is using all your community partners pretty effectively on just making sure that you're being transparent. I would think that's a really critical aspect, but that intentional reach out is really a really valuable thing that the community is doing. So good job on that. And I know you're working with the chamber right now on trying to lay out future for the community. So it's sounds like you're doing a lot of cool stuff.
Well, to be transparent, I'm at Surfside Beach, which is about 10 miles south of Angleton. We're here for a chamber leadership retreat. So really, if you want me to turn the camera, I'll show you the ocean. But they're running a great leadership program that involves the community. And so we'll go over the next 6 months to different venues like medical, transportation, city hall. So we get to learn about each other and learn about the community and have that interaction.
Chris, I congratulate you on being there. I think that the only way that you can impact a community, this is me speaking as a city manager, you have to have those relationships with the people who are influential in the community. If you don't have those relationships, trying to do something that's different or that's transformational for your community, it's just much, much more difficult. And if you work together with all cross-sector work on trying to figure out how's best to move your community forward, that's a really positive thing. So I applaud you for working with the chamber. Hey, Ben, let's just jump over to you. Ben, can you talk about how the community input influences the work that you're doing in Farmers Branch?
Yeah, and I got to echo a lot of what Chris said, because, I have that firm stop coming up. That's my Rotary meeting coming up this afternoon that my boss and I go to. And so we're always there. We love to brag about our city and talk about what's going on, because there's a lot of exciting things that are going on. But, sometimes it's tough to share that, to get folks to see why is this exciting. So it's another way of sharing why it's so exciting, because sometimes it looks like it's really easy when it's not, or it's, oh, that was really simple. Whoa, no, it's not. There's a lot of processes that go to get here and there. And what's even better is we're still a region. You know, we're very proud of what we do, but we're part of a greater region. So it's a shared rotary between two cities. And so Carrollton, our much larger neighbor to the north, has 2 council members in this one. We have a council member and a mayor in ours, plus different staff. And so it's collaborating together as well. So that rising tide philosophy, when we talk about getting community feedback and input, you know, Chris talked a lot about this too, is you always do what you've always done. You always get what you always got. The problem is the variables changed a lot. You know, COVID hit, the winter storm hit. You can't rely on those same mechanisms. And what we found was a lot of our residents were really craving getting back to normal. I think everybody was excited to get back to the office. So one of our big things was to adapt how we communicated and how we delivered services. The library went almost immediately to a delivery model using the park staff. And so in there, we're also dropping flyers about, hey, here's how you can participate. Parks was holding special events and spraying big circles on the ground. So here's how you can social distance, because we want to have people there in person. We want to protect our staff and our residents. You know, we put up, all of a sudden you have those plexi acrylic things going up everywhere to create barriers. But what we were finding is a lot of our folks, and especially our employees, craved that in-person service delivery. So a lot of our messaging was, how do we reach our folks? Because we're kind of desensitized to download the newest app, and we're in the middle of an app launch right now. So I hate to say that, but it's how do you convince people this is what they need to communicate with us? So our biggest format, as we found, is we had a neat transition during this time. Our world-class, world-famous communications director retired. And so it's like, oh my gosh, big shoes to fill. So we talked about what's the future of communications in this type of environment. So we brought in a new director who worked under him for about 6 months in a transitionary phase, was very focused on video productions. And so we've morphed, instead of having print everywhere, stuff everywhere, we're starting to push a lot more videos. And can we get our message across in 2 minutes to 5 minutes and really have you tell you what the message is? So instead of you figuring out, hey, what are they really talking about with this budget? We just passed our budgets that time of year. We had a budget video that says, hey, as this gets discussed about, here's what's in this budget. You don't need to go look at the slides. You don't have to come to the meeting, because even with $130-something million budget, I think we had 10 visitors, and that's still really high for us for a budget meeting. And so I was like, is there something controversial that we didn't anticipate? They were just there to see the process, which was fantastic. But traditionally, participation, like you said earlier, 20% of folks in general, that I'm surprised it's that high, have been to a council meeting. So how do you get the messaging out? And so what we did is kind of reversed course as well with some of so we have our standard communication channels, we have our events. We started using our boards to push information out to us, because the board members are all connected. In a lot of cases, they're community leaders, to be an extension of council and say, here's the messaging. So instead of the library board just talking about the library, we said, hey, here's the status of the city. Let's go talk about what's going on, big picture. Yes, you're the library advisory board, you've got that. Can we also ask you all to help push information this way, reach people that may not reach to the city, but they may reach to you? Hey, have you talked to your neighbor? Did you know about this program? So we used a lot of reversing of the communication channels. Instead of boards pushing to council and staff, it went, hey, council's wanting to share these messages. Let's get it to all our channels, and started utilizing our boards as much as we could as well to be part of this conversation, because they were craving stuff to do. Everybody was craving getting back to normal. And we did have the Zoom links and some other stuff, which we utilized for several folks wanted to make sure and keep that separation, or the underlying reasons to, hey, I want to participate, but I need that remote access. We also found a strong majority still wanted to be included in that. So it was kind of reimagining how people consume information and trying to reach through non-traditional mechanisms, but still reinforcing the ones that work.
I love
Ben,
that. Go ahead,
Ben,
Chris.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned, short videos from your marketing, and we're looking at doing some public service announcements using TikTok style, fun videos. Can you talk about your experience with that?
So we haven't gotten to TikTok yet, but we've gotten to where we're doing some video productions to where when we're talking about the story, we also don't just put the same people on there. Everybody loves the fire chief and police chief, right? So we put them on camera quite a bit. We're putting different directors in there quite a bit just to talk about their story. Our finance director's on there. And so it's quick snippets of information. If you could tell the public anything you want to know, for example, about the budget, like what, because you probably have your top 10 list right now. Here's the top 10 things in this budget. There's a whole bunch more, probably 300 or 400 pages more of good stuff, but here's the 10 things I want you to know. Like, here's about the property tax rate. So we really focused on translating to the message how this impacts you as residents and why we're going this path. Because we didn't lower our tax rate this year. We could have, but by holding the tax rate what it was, would increase the overall average property tax bill by $19 and some change. So $20 essentially. We said, hey, don't look at this as a $20 tax increase. Look at this with $20. We're now going pay as you go for streets. We're adding this to the park system. We're adding this to the infrastructure. And so we're trying to reverse that messaging, saying instead of here's what you're losing, here's what you're getting. But the short videos have been fantastic. And honestly, Arlington, I think, took the world by storm with their budget video with the Lego animation. Who didn't see that and go, wow.
That was great, man. I love that. Matt, have you seen that?
I have not, but I'll take a look at it. I'm just writing it down right now.
It's fantastic. It really is. They did a really good job. And flattery is the best form of imitation. We're like, how did they do that? And our communications director was on it. But yeah, the video sharing has been huge for us, and it catches people's attention.
Yeah. Hey, Ben, one of the things I really appreciate you bringing up as you start thinking about how resident input influences the delivery of services is find somebody who doesn't like people bragging about where they live, right? The value of the work that you're doing resulting in people bragging about that community pride, or I live in Farmers Branch. That only happens if you have a good connection with the residents. And that only happens if you've got good, effective engagement strategies so people do feel connected. So I love hearing you talk about that because it's working. And really happy to hear how you have been creative on getting people's input on things that you're working on. So congratulations on that.
Absolutely. I'll give you all one more example that's kind of neat. We know National Night Out's coming up, right? So in Texas, we do National Night Out in October. We love that event from a city staff perspective, because how often is it you get your whole community together celebrating the city, right? A lot of times, especially in the city manager's office, we're getting the, hey, my trash didn't get picked up. It's like, that's unfortunate. We can get that fixed. Hey, code enforcement this, animal services that. You hear some of the other feedback loops. So we do a thing called Farmers Branch Night Out that we do in March and April, where it's a play on National Night Out. They're far enough apart to where they're not confused. And we call it Celebrate Farmers Branch. And we set up a pod essentially in each council district. And we send the fire trucks, we send the police cars. We also send food. We have found that the magic formula is if I send an ice cream truck and the city's got it, or a popsicle truck, snow cone trucks, especially in Texas, because it's still hot even in March, April, May. It has been amazing because there's so much going on. It's hard to just talk about it in one night. And so we have this event and our council loves it. So that's a huge part. They love going out and seeing huge crowds. And we did some tagging on social media for the first time this year. We're trying to encourage more people to tell our story with us, rather than just us pushing the information. So we had residents tagging on Instagram and Facebook. I'm not the best with social media, but my marketing team is fantastic with it. And so having them, hey, get into a drawing if you do this. We'll go through and look at the post and say, hey, help us tell the story. And so far it's worked for us. I will give a warning though. Another city I may have heard of tried this and it may have gone a different direction. So that is kind of, you got to be careful. Stories, you can't really control it. Once you open the door, it's going to take off. But we've really enjoyed having events just to celebrate what's going on in the city and just having an opportunity to say, hey, yeah, we may not always disagree on everything as a community. You can't. There's too many of us here. But in general, it's an amazing place to live with a lot of good things to be excited about. And we also make all the directors available. So we separate the directors and departments out and say, hey, have you met your code enforcement manager? This is the person that's got this. That's controversial in most cities, right? And so like, hey, animal services here. Hey, there's some dogs for adoption available too. So we really use it as an event to build those connections and relationships, because we're in the relationship business. And it's really easy to scream at somebody through a keyboard. But when you've made that personal connection, and it's like, hey, I know Sarah, I know Leo. It changes the relationship. It's like, hey, Sarah, hey, Leo, I got a concern. Can you help me? It helps us move this into a relationship rather than a city versus resident thing. Because a lot of my employees do live here.
Yeah, no, very well said. Yeah, you're doing a lot of really cool stuff. Really happy to be hearing about all this stuff. Thanks. Ben, can you kind of share the strategy and tools that you're finding successful for doing that engagement? And I'm particularly interested in how you're reaching those populations in your community that maybe typically harder to reach, as well as how the community is tracking your performance.
Okay, so there's a lot there, and I love performance management, so I could probably spend an unhealthy amount of time talking about it. So I'm going to reverse and start with performance management so I can limit myself on that one. For us, we align to something called the balanced scorecard methodology. That's how we've aligned our scorecards. We have public-facing dashboards. And what it really is we're trying to take the emotion and assumption out of data and really focus on how the city creates value for our residents. Because I say, hey, we have a great police department. Absolutely. But why is it great? And so we found the benchmarks that are out there either through ICMA or best practices. We always link back to those and say, here's our benchmarks and what we're doing, and show why we believe we're delivering world-class service on a daily basis. But we also have a firm understanding from a city side that if your scorecard is all green, your measures aren't good enough. I'll be honest with you. That means it's too easy. It's like it should be mostly green, like a Christmas tree with splashes of yellow and red in there. And a great example of that is my fire chief was missing response times from one of his stations. It was geographically in the wrong spot. He used data to show saying, if this station was here, my travel times, that's truly the only time they can influence, because dispatch is going to have the dispatch time and the turnout time. So there's a couple things that help with location, but he was able to use performance being missed as a leverage to say, my business case, why I need this fire station here. And that's a $12 million ask. And was able to get council support to do that, issue the COs to build that new fire station. But the way we use data really is we identified performance measures by each department, went in and said, hey, tell me how you deliver world-class service, excellent service, however you want to call it, but how are you the best of the best? And like, well, this is why we do this. And I said, okay, how do we turn that into a measure? And also when we looked at measures, because you have to give some guidance on this, was we looked at the questions being asked by residents and council. And for example, code enforcement was one of the constant concerns we got was code enforcement doesn't do their job. The residents are initiating all the cases. So we built a performance measure that shows case initiation by staff versus external sources. And we found that staff was initiating about 90% of all cases, but we didn't have the data before. So if you're a resident, you don't see the data. All you're thinking is, why do I always have to call this in? What are they doing? And we can say, whoa. Hey, well, there was always opportunities to improve, but they're initiating 90% of those cases from the staff perspective. So we use data to tell a story and shows how we create value, because that's the big part for us, is making sure we're telling that story. But also you've got to remove the assumption and the emotion from it. Otherwise, we don't make progress. As far as tools, we've been really utilizing the constant, just making sure we're targeting the right groups, translating into Spanish. We have a large Hispanic population that does have Spanish as a primary language, but we've also been taking some cultural education notes on how from a cultural perspective, from our Latin population, how is the messaging should be received and how should it be worked through from a marketing perspective to encourage participation. Our council members have done a lot to help with that. We've also added more Spanish depth on our team to make sure we can communicate with our residents. And also just more outreach into the neighborhood, using door hangers, trying traditional methods, but new updates on there, reaching out to faith-based organizations that are in the communities, and also just having more events in those communities. We have one area that had never had a national night out event. And so I went to the apartment complex and said, hey, it's coming up. Are y'all interested? And they're like, hey, we don't have the bandwidth. We don't have any really money to do this. And I said, so what do you need? I said, what if I bring an ice cream truck? Can you hand out the flyers and get people there? And we had 400 to 500 people there for one national night out location. There's a big park, so don't worry about distancing, but it was amazing because a lot of these folks had never met their council members, never met their mayor, never met any of the staff that are there to work for them. And so it was a good opportunity to make some connections. But also we heard from some of the teachers that we know. And so we work with the school district a lot too, to get messaging out. And one of my teachers came to me and said, hey, my students are talking about the city's ice cream function. And I was like, yeah, we're sending the ice cream truck. We're going to have some fun. Because we have an ice cream vendor that does all our special events and loves the city and everybody loves them. But it just turned out to be an amazing event. You have the fire chief out there throwing a football, because at the end of the day, we're all people. And sometimes you just need to see, yes, he's the fire chief, but he's a person too. He's a father with several children, loves being around kids. Throwing a football is what he loves to do. And I'm like, hey, fire chief, I need you to come to a work event where we're paid to go out there and throw a football with some of the youth of our community. And so honestly, it's just showing that we're here to serve the community, all parts of our community. Another thing we've done is our parks department was gracious enough to listen to the idea of putting stamps on our major walked trails. So we put some stamped like cement stickers down. And we did that for the census, and it worked really well because they're like, what's the stamp on the concrete? And so just non-traditional creative things that make people stop and pause and just being involved as much as we can.
I think that is very, very cool. You're doing a lot of just really, really creative stuff. If I were a local government leader and I were asking you, okay, so I'm really trying to get to my Hispanic community, what would be the best thing the best tip that you could provide me as a local government leader that's worked for you for reaching out to that community?
So we've asked this question, and so my Spanish teacher actually teaches Spanish and culture for the school district. They have a program for adult folks to come in and learn Spanish. And when I was asking her that question, I was like, Ms. Tazar, how do I reach this community? That's why I'm here. I'm trying to learn to speak Spanish, which it's a long journey to go. But that's one of my goals as well, is to be able to at least have conversational Spanish. But she goes, you have to understand the culture first. Just to speak the language is not one thing, but she said the biggest thing you can do is if you trying means more than anything else. If you try and just go have a conversation, even if it's just a basic conversation, it's that almost that reaching out hand saying, I'm trying, I'm kind of putting myself in that vulnerable spot of, I get it. But she goes, remember, those folks are also in the vulnerable spot every day because they're trying to sometimes speak English when a lot of times it's not the first language. And so they appreciate the effort and the trying to get there. And so that's what the city is doing, is just pushing a lot more information in Spanish. But we also have folks not just translating it, but make sure it's culturally resonating with our Hispanic community, our Latin community, because there's a lot of different cultures within the Spanish speaking grouping. So there's a lot of all the different countries, major differences in culture that she taught us to be more cognitive. So we had a lot of culture lessons on the different Spanish speaking cultures that are out there, the Latin countries, because it's different between the different countries, significantly different, and to be sensitive to those differences and honestly just educate yourself. So for us, the biggest way to reach our Spanish speaking community in our city was work through the churches. That was the guidance we were given, saying, hey, work through the churches. That is your first step. If you want to get a message out, that's the first step. And the other one is just it's continuous trying. So it's not going to be a magic switch. It's not going to flip overnight. It's that continuous feedback, but also to unlearn some assumptions. We may be working with a company named Polko on our survey right now. And one of the things they taught us was, I was like, hey, how do we work this for Spanish translations? And they provided some neat insight to saying that your Spanish speaking community has lived here in most cases for a while. They've already found ways to adapt. And when they're consuming information, if it's in English, typically there's plugins and tools they have that allow that information to be consumed. And so they're like, be careful of making assumptions of, we have to translate this into Spanish. Remember, they're most likely going to have tools already at his or her disposal to help with that. So that was really eye-opening for us and my communications team to say, wait a second, think about this. You've got to make sure folks are interested we've also posed this same question to our youth council, because I found that the most effective way to get parents to listen, regardless of anything else, is to start with the children. And they talked to us a lot about how their parents consume information and how to reach them. And it was completely different than what we talked about. They're like, hey, the cable channel, like they always have this cable channel is number one, which is more expensive, I'll be honest. And so we're still looking at that. They're like, this is the channel that is always on. If you want to get a message, there's where it needs to be. And I was like, oh, and they're like, Facebook. Facebook is a common messaging platform for folks who have relatives in other countries to reach. And so they're like, Facebook's a really effective tool. So we're making all these like just more and more communications blast when it needs to be more surgical and specific. And so the youth council was fantastic because they're 17, 18-year-olds that are going to be adults that want to be active in our community. But we're like, how do we reach your parents? And how will we reach you once you're an adult and you're no longer on the youth council? They opened our eyes to a lot of ideas, they talked to us a lot about food, because we're like, hey, can we do some type of food to celebrate this event? And they're like, there's only one restaurant in Farmers Branch that serves authentic food that draws us to. Otherwise, you have to go to another town. It's like, who knew those little nuances? And so a lot of it for us has been learning the cultures of those we're trying to serve as well. And so that's been eye-opening for us, because I had no idea, because they could list real quick the 3 restaurants. One's in Farmers Branch, 2 are in Addison. I was like, is that it? And they're like, yes. If you want authentic food, that's where you have to go. I was like, who knew?
Huh. That's great. I did, honestly, I didn't realize that you were actually using our tools. So I'm glad to hear that.
Our survey right now.
Yeah. I'm just looking at your community survey results. So, or it's ongoing right now. Mm-hmm. So yeah, very cool. Thank you. Really appreciate you sharing what's working for you in Farmers Branch, because that is an issue that is challenging for every community. Not just with the Hispanic Latin community, but just with all of those minority groups. And I think that you've offered up some really great advice. So thank you very much for that.
So, and as a clarifier, our community is about 55% Hispanic. And so I just want to give demographics of it, and about 40% Caucasian, and then a blend of the other cultures and groups as well. So that kind of gives our demographics as to why this is such a high priority focus for us, because it's a large part of our community that we're trying to reach.
That's very good. Yeah, thanks for that background. Thanks. Chris, can you talk about the strategies that you're using in Angleton for things that you're defining successful for connecting with your residents, and how the community is going about the process of tracking your performance?
Yeah, so we're trying to be like Ben and kind of be metrics driven. Our police department does a great job about response times and patrol zones and that kind of stuff. So when we get those questions about, hey, we haven't seen a patrol car, we can go back and show, where they've been, how many times they've been, whatever in that particular neighborhood, if that's the question. One of the successful things that's been happening for a while is engagement with our ministerial alliance. And so the police department holds a monthly meeting. In fact, I think it's happening right now in Angleton, where the ministerial alliance there's probably 10 or so churches that regularly show up, and a couple others that are, hit and miss, but also community partners. We've got food banks, we've got health networks, we've got all these social networks, all these other enablers that show up to the meetings. So the topic today is development. Another topic on another meeting might be healthcare. We did a whole rollout for the hurricane and signing people up for Code Red. And we feel communicating through like churches and the school and Rotary, just like you all have done, allows our message to be shared, not directly from us. So we don't look like the big government's telling you to sign up for Code Red. We've got churches saying, hey, we want to be resilient. Help us help you and sign up for Code Red so we can spread the message. And so we've had churches get up and say, hey, here's the flyer from the city, here's how you can sign up. So when we did our hurricane campaign over the last couple months, hurricane season starts in June. So we started in March and every month had a sort of a message. But we were able to work through that. And again, we stand up at Rotary and do the same thing. At Rotary this past year, we've had all of our department heads cycle through as a guest speaker. So whether it's Public Works, it's the city secretary, it's the finance director, they all get up to give their spiel of what's going on in their world and how they interact with the community or the city. We've got senior groups that meet over our rec centers, sponsored by our recs department. So that's an opportunity. Again, we can message with the senior folks about what's important to them, and they appreciated, this past year getting back together, and they hadn't seen each other in a year. They hadn't had the opportunity to socialize, and so now they're back at it, and they're happy. And we got a new rec bus through our enterprise fleet program, and so they're excited. They got a new bus that's replacing the 15-year-old bus with the faded, wrap on it. But so it's things like that. We get to, again, socialize. We get some feedback. They tell us what they want, and we talk about issues that are important to them. So we bring in the Gulf Coast Transit folks. We bring in the health folks, and so talk about things that are important to the senior groups. And again, they can go back and sell what the city's doing. And just like we're probably about 30% Hispanic. We're 10 to 15% African American. And so, we do some Spanish messaging also. So if we put something out that's citywide, we do the English and Spanish thing. And because that's important to make sure we reach everyone. And the last part, we kind of realized in the health inspections for the restaurant, we've got all these great Mexican restaurants in Angleton, and some of them are like 2 people strong, others are 15. But we got to do health inspections in Spanish, and so we got to come up with that form, help that process.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It really sounds like Angleton's got a really great network of community partners that you have established that are working to make the community work, which is really, really great to hear.
I mean, last week it was, quick phone calls between the superintendent, the health care system, the nursing homes. Hey, who's got power? Who doesn't? Everyone's got water check. What are your issues? We're good. and so to have that kind of communication where we can just quickly commiserate with each other on statuses was kind of very helpful. Then I could, relay that to the council and the mayor.
Yeah, especially, I'm glad you brought that up, because when you get into those crisis situations, you can't establish those relationships in the midst of a crisis, can you? You have to have them in place. And that's where the power of a community and the resiliency of a community really shows itself.
Well, yeah, you want to be able to pick up the phone and know they're going to answer, and that I'm not just calling for some, silly thing or something. It's, hey, we just need to communicate. I shared the status of the city. Here's where we're at, because the superintendent's worried about reopening with roads and water and power. And, we're engaging Texas and New Mexico, which is our power provider, getting status on who's back in power and when, and to help them make decisions.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on everything that that you're doing in the community and in the midst of all of the challenges that have been confronting you. Thanks a lot. Gentlemen, if you have any questions or that you want to ask each other, or additional thoughts, right now would be a great time to offer that up.
So Ben, I'll ask you, what kind of initiative things, whether it's technology or energy or something that you guys are working on?
The biggest thing we're working on right now is the proposal for a solar farm, essentially over one of our old landfills you can't really build anything on top of it. And so we have a sustainability team that's got a great pitch, because whenever you have an open field and right outside of Dallas, like, ooh, what can we put there? It's like, well, not much. So we're looking at putting a solar grid across it. There's a company that will come in and basically ground lease it from us and pay us royalties, not royalties, but a fee for putting the solar farm in. So it'll generate about $100,000 per year for the city. It's green. It's a green initiative. And then after 20 years, it reverts to our control as far as the solar panels, which will allow us to get more income to then clean it up later. But that's probably the biggest one we're doing right now. And then we're also doing a lot of movement towards electric vehicle infrastructure. So that's another one too. We're starting to put the lines in, not necessarily charging stations. And we're at that policy inflection point of, do we charge or not charge? Because the basic argument is we don't provide free gas, but the other side of it is it's a philosophical alignment. We want to encourage it. So the charging stations we will eventually put in will allow us to one day charge or something to where we can recoup if we need to. But a lot of sustainability initiatives from infrastructure perspectives, from electricity perspectives as well. And a lot of movement. We own a city-owned landfill as well, separate from our city. It lives in another city, creates a lot of unique opportunities and challenges, just trying to how to be ready for that closure in the future.
Awesome, man. Sounds like a lot of great things going on there.
Oh, same thing for Angleton. I was like, wow, they've got a lot going on. I can't imagine hurricanes on top of that, because that means y'all are constantly on the move. And just, wow, I mean, you've got a lot going on down there. It sounds amazing. Will you be at ICMA? I'm just curious.
No, so I just joined ICMA and entered into the credential manager program. So I'm waiting. I don't have 7 years as a city manager yet, so wait until next year. But we're dead in hurricane season. I mean, September 10th is the midpoint, so hopefully we're on the decrease. But we've got, I'm going to TML here in about 2 weeks, and a couple other things, some leadership stuff we're doing internally. So that's one of my goals, and I'm hunting for the Hawaii one, or some other kind of where I can wear all my beach shirts.
Well, excellent. I know we'll cross paths in the future, so that's what I look forward to. Because to me, what makes this successful is we're all facing similar challenges. It's not necessarily unique. Like, we all have similar goals that we're working towards, but each community's pathway to get there is different. So I love hearing the other ideas of what's going on, and it takes a lot of creativity. And I love that there's other folks that are creatively solving stuff. So I'm like, how did you do that? Because it really makes this possible.
But you mentioned solar, so we have a rec center that is now sort of our resiliency center, where we've got water showers, now we've got power, we've got UV lights, so we can, if we get a boil water notice, we can purify the water. But you mentioned solar. That's one of my other things, is like, okay, so how do we get off the grid? How do we catch rainwater so that we don't rely on our own water if that goes out? Or how do we provide potable water to residents when we've been hit by a hurricane. They've got, just like the winter storm, we had probably 400 houses that lost water because of busted pipes and everything else. So how do you provide them water in a time like that? And other than out of a garden hose, bring their bucket and fill them up. So I love the solar initiative that you're doing to be self-sustaining. I think we got Tesla battery pack down here recently. And so, you think about, again, how do you capture it, store it, and use it later when you really need it?
And in all fairness, we're not off the grid, because all the incentives and agreements, especially through our T&D, which is Encore up here, is they let us get to 75%, which is a huge offset. But to get to 100%, and there's some other strange nuanced rules with metering before the meter, after the meter, and some other rules. We found the sweet spot from a financial perspective is gets close to that 60%. You don't really want to be at 75, so you're really towing the line. But around 60, 65%, there's a lot of huge financial tools out there, and that's how we did it, because solar on itself is incredibly expensive. But to just do the upfront investment, it's a 7-year return to investment for us. With the incentives, without them, it put us at 12. And so we leveraged a lot of incentives where we could, to credits, everything we could, to get those solar panels in, just from a philosophical alignment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Hey, given my connections with ICMA as well as Ben's connections with ICMA, one thing that you brought up, which I think we should be addressing as a profession, is given your leadership in the military and given the parallel paths that officers in the military have relating to leadership and being in environments very similar to communities, that credentialing qualifying period should be reduced. It seems there's a lot of merit in thinking about that. One of my colleagues is on the credentialing committee. I'm going to be sending him a note after this panel, just suggesting that, because I think you're bringing up a really valid point. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a great program with the courses you take and the assessment, and eventually you got to do a 360 or 380 assessment or something. Those are all great things to kind of make you really rethink, like, hey, what's my leadership style? How do I engage the community? How do I deal with problems in that academic environment that allows for that thinking? So I enjoyed the process, and just happy to be privileged to have that credentialing.
Well, I'm glad that you have found ICMA, and you'll find that it's a really helpful, key professional resource for you as you continue your career in the city management world.
Well, one of the things we're doing is we're adopting a sister city program.
Yeah.
To find an international city that we can partner with, and again, the whole thought is, everyone's got great ideas on how to do city business. And so why not learn from someone else and push yourself?
I used to chair the international committee for ICMA, and we are clearly in a global world and in global environment. And the more that we can learn from each other, things are pretty universal across the globe. So congratulations. That's great. Anything I can do to help in that area, I'm more than happy to help.
Well, I may pick your brain sometime.
Yep, absolutely. Feel free.
Gentlemen, to run. Thank you for your time. Chris, I hope to follow in your footsteps one day on credentialing. I still have my years to go as well. So, I think it's great to have new folks in the roles, though, bringing in different ideas and new ideas. That's part of it too, is that creativity. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and energy. Chris, I look forward to meeting you again. I know we'll cross paths out there.
You bet, Ben. Great to meet you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your time, guys. It was a great conversation. The best part for me is I get to meet two great guys every week. So really, really appreciate the time that you provided and the stuff that you're doing in your communities. It's really been outstanding. I will catch up with you. I'll get you contact information for each other, and then catch up with you. I'd love to get some feedback from you on just how this panel experience was for you.
Well, Matt, it's been a great experience, and again, meeting other city managers that have great ideas and having that dialogue, I think, is important to us all.
That's super. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Ben, I'll see you in Portland.